way down the hill was steep, the track slippery in the rain. The horses scattered stones from beneath their hooves. The warriors blinked water from their eyes and slid in the mud, anxious as much for what might be out in the blinding rain as their footing. The noise of the rain and the newborn stream running down the path deadened their hearing. They knew that if they were attacked, they would not hear their assailants coming, and with the litter bearing their injured leader to hamper 2 of the horses, there would be no question of running. They had removed their identifying badges, their banners. Rain darkened, their clothes merged with the landscape, but the horses would be noticeable from a distance, and in this place, even so few horses meant only one thing, and so they were as conspicuous as if they rode in full battle gear, glittering and loud with banners. Breed slid on mud and gravel, her breath coming in hard, painful gasps that did not know how to let the air out again. She fell, scraping hand, knee, elbow, face. Rolling herself tight against the vast roots of a fallen tree, she pressed herself to the dead bark, fingers digging for purchase in the mossy growth between the reaching limbs. The harsh gasps stilled sufficiently that the hissing of breath would scarce be distinguished from the rain. She closed her eyes as though that could make her less visible, and prayed to anything that was listening and kindly disposed, that this new band of warriors had not seen her as she careered round the edge of the hill, away from the much larger company she had already avoided. What were they all doing, still skulking about up here? The battle had been miles away and days ago, and there was no telling which side was which. Not that it would mean much. No one was exactly a friend anymore. The marshes had been disputed land for far too long for that. Breath slowing, but her heart still painful in its dipping and pounding, Breed listened for any hint of pursuit and heard voices, indistinct but quite close. She didn't dare raise her head to check, simply praying that the mud and rain would disguise her sufficiently that the riders would pass her by. She shivered, cold, wet and afraid, and wondered whether she would ever get down from the hill and back to where Adair would be watching, and her mother would be pretending she was not terrified by an absence of nearly 2 days. Breed hugged the ground even closer as a horse knocked a shod hoof against the far side of the great tree, and her heart pounded in response. Maeve pushed wet hair out of her eyes and then dropped her hands to steady the litter hung between the horses as they stumbled on the path down to the marshy valley, where, perhaps, there was a village. She watched Caller riding slowly back up the barely discernible trail, silently willing her to bring good news. Almost without thinking, she checked her limping band of warriors. Kai moving up to ride at her shoulder, ready to take his turn on foot. Balin and Aenir slightly ahead, Riordan away behind, watchful of the horizon. She looked at Tegan, white-faced and still within the tight wrapping of the makeshift litter. She listened hard, trying to hear Tegan's breathing over the roar of rain, watching for movement, noting the water pooling once more in Tegan's eyes. She reached to wipe it away, and Tegan woke from her uneasy sleep, reached out a hand and tangled her fingers into Maeve's. "Your hands are freezing," Maeve said, worried that Tegan could still feel icy to her own hands, which were numb with cold. She glanced up anxiously as Caller's horse crowded her. "There must be a village," Caller insisted. "This is a track that leads somewhere, and I can smell smoke." "Another burnt village," Kai muttered sourly. Maeve glanced up at him, angry that he voiced her own fear. Caller offered Kai the battered leather hat with which she had so far protected her thin, pale hair. "No," she said patiently, "cooking." Tegan loosened her hold on Maeve and reached out for the hat. "I'll have that. Then Maeve can stop waking me to mop my eyes." Tegan's voice was faint in the roar of rain, and Kai had to strain to hear her next words. "Caller will be right." "So there's a village. That doesn't mean there's a welcome. We don't know if we're over the border yet." "We need a village," Tegan said tersely, "and a welcome, and somewhere warm, and a healer would be a good idea." Maeve looked at her sharply and slowed the lead horse to a gentler pace. Breed tried to untangle the sound of horses. How many were there? 5? 6? Moving on, thank the goddess. She could hear the bridles, even though they had done their best to muffle them. She lay and waited until she could hear nothing but rain, and lay a few minutes more to be sure, then slowly lifted her head and stared down the hill at the group of warriors heading straight for her home. Caller was the first to glimpse the smoke she'd smelt. She slowed, trying to work out what lay ahead. She felt a presence at her shoulder and looked up at Balin. His bulk sheltered her for a moment. He turned his eyes down the hill towards the swollen turn of the river. "Is that a village?" he asked. Caller raised her shoulder, the sodden woolen coat sticking to her back, cold against her flesh. "It looks like a fort," Balin persisted, and Caller bit her lips as his words solidified her anxious uncertainty into ramparts and walls that had been uncertain blur until now. "Marsh dwellers don't like outsiders," she said. "It's not just that, surely. Those walls mean business. But there are fields, look. Someone's been growing crops, and there are too many sheep to just be provisioning a fort. This is a settlement, not an outpost." Balin sighed. "I wish I knew whether that was a good thing." Maeve rode up behind them. "What now?" "Walls, and a gate, and a guard." Balin hesitated. "Only one guard." "Then why are we waiting? They'll not let us in, Maeve." Maeve eased her tense shoulders and looked back up the hill to the stand of trees that could have been their shelter for the night. She stared at the uncertain plain beyond the village. "We didn't come this way before. This valley doesn't look as though there's been a battle here. Not recently." Caller and Balin waited for her decision, pretending not to hear the uncertainty in her voice. "If we go on, we have to cross the far branch of the river tonight," Aenir offered, resting his hand on the shuddering neck of Caller's horse. "We'll not manage it. The water's high, the horses are exhausted, and there's Tegan." Maeve's eyes flickered to Tegan, asleep or unconscious. She looked again at the steep rise of the hill and flexed a knee that was complaining at the cold and the damp and the incline. "We have to risk the village," she said quietly.